Welcome to the Mind Solution podcast with Sarah Maud. The Mind Solution podcast is for leaders like you who are passionate about well-being in the workplace because you understand that a strong, resilient and happy workforce is the key to your organisation's success. The Mind Solution podcast is here to help you. So join us every week where we'll share with you powerful insights, strategies and know-how to ensure that your people and your organisation are truly thriving from the inside out. Okay, hello and welcome to everybody and another either podcast that you're listening to from themindsolution.com, or you might also be listening to this on YouTube. But either way, today I am joined by Louise Kennedy, who is the founder and owner of Oculus HR, which I love the name of. I'd love to find out a little bit more about what Oculus means. It kind of rolls off your tongue, doesn't it?
I know. So, well, thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate that I'm on the podcast, and I'm really looking forward to being able to have our conversation today. So, I will explain where Oculus comes from actually. So it's when we were deciding whether to set the business up, kind of where it was going through a redundancy point and making decisions around it. I was actually in Rome at the time in the Pantheon. And me and my husband had been walking around, and it was his 40th birthday that we were there for. And as we were in there, there's an Oculus in the ceiling, which is a big circular opening. So it can be like an architectural side of things. It's also a part of an eye. But when we went into the building, there was a light coming through the middle of it. So the sun was shining through the middle of it. And we thought how relevant the fact that actually for what HR is, everything that's in the dark is the must do. All the things that we should do for contracts, policies, procedures, everything that we must do. And actually the light coming through is the difference that you can make within a business and help the people that were in there, the employees within the business. So yeah, so that's what it's about. So the darkness is kind of the must do, and the light is what businesses can be able to shine the light to be able to help their employees on. So it's a nice little story that we have.
It has. And actually I think it's very fitting for our conversation today about health and well-being in the workplace, because as we chatted about before we hit the record button at the Mind Solution, we're bringing that light to organizations and to employees to help them to see through the limitations of their thinking, which keeps them stuck in the dark, keeps them stuck in that prison that is our mindset, and how people can break through that and step into the light. So yeah, we've got a lot of light going on already today, Louise.
Yeah, definitely.
I'd love to just have you just share a little bit about your background and why should people listen to you, Louise?
Why should I listen? So we've got a HR company, so it's 11 years old now. So we're based in the northeast of England, but pretty much work throughout the UK, kind of as we have opened up. We were very much around the day-to-day HR support for businesses, which were anybody starting from taking the first employee on, all the way through to businesses that really need some operational support. And then over the last few months, really over about the last 6-7 months, we've opened up our services more to be able to provide things like chief people officer roles, which are, again, a small business can't always provide to people to be able to, to their employees, that they have someone who's looking at the strategy of a business to being able to take it forward. So we found that to be really successful, that we can provide that senior level to be able to help a small business have strategy without having to pay that big cost of having somebody in-house 100% of the time. So we do that. I personally love delivering on the emotional intelligence. So we do kind of assessments and training around emotional intelligence, which is, again, great because that really shapes a senior leadership team. So we do that, and we do things like mediation and Rising Stars programs. And so there's a huge amount that we actually do. So I think from a point of view of us chatting today, I think it'll be great just to be able to understand a little bit more around what we do, how we can help in a business, but also from a mindset point of view, how you can shape the way that you're working as a senior leader within a business. If you've got the right mindset, if you've got that positive kind of go-getter type attitude, and with regard to how someone's thinking about it and how they frame the thoughts in the mind of the actions that they're going to actually undertake there as well.
So from your experience, you've had a number of years running this organisation and your background is HR, and I think it's probably reasonable to say that in a post-pandemic world, that when it comes to health and well-being, I don't think we've ever seen such a focus on health and well-being in the workplace. But I'm curious about what are the most significant trends you're seeing within organisations when it comes to health and well-being in the workplace?
I think trend-wise, I think there's certainly a huge amount more awareness or a freedom of conversation around health and well-being. I think previously, I'm saying previously, prior to COVID, I think people would more kind of, deal with their situations, or very often someone would be maybe on longer term sick and you'd be trying to encourage them back into work. I think people or we certainly feel is that there's more freedom of conversation that's taken place within the workplace around kind of ensuring that they're comfortable at work, whether they have issues going on outside of work, or whether they're in work, or whether they're just making their workplace aware of any concerns that they have from just a health and wellbeing point of view in general. So we've certainly seen more of that taking place, and the reach out and the support for companies to be able to provide services such as counselling support. And we work with different counselling support services that are there, but actually companies are more prepared to pay for that to ensure that actually the people that are working for them are well looked after. So that's seen a massive increase. And I think what the companies have started to see is kind of the payback of loyalty that people have within them if they know that they've paid a couple of £1,000 being paid out on some type of support service for them, that they're committed back to the business as well. So we've seen that as being a real trend of kind of, I think it's the showing of commitment from the employer to the employee. And I think that's been really, really beneficial there as well. So I think they're probably the main two trends that we've been seeing. But I do certainly believe that more companies are doing more within the workplace and kind of looking at different strategies of how they can help and hopefully get to the point that it's not just a tick box exercise as we were talking about before. It's kind of actually that they can really make a difference to be able to support their employees in many different ways there as well.
Now, playing a bit of devil's advocate with you, picking up on what you said about counselling services. So, as you know, my background is HR, and I've been the founder of the Mind Solution for about 12, 13 years. And I still see organizations following what I would suggest is a very traditional approach to helping people in the form of counselling services. And yet we have this world of alternative approaches to health and well-being. So, for me, my background as an energy worker, an energy healer, hypnotherapy, forms of treating anything that can support people in a far more effective way than traditional talk therapies. And I'm wondering if you're seeing any of that from your own experience, where organizations are looking at more what I would call leading edge approaches to supporting people and moving away from, old talking therapy support.
I genuinely don't. I genuinely think that companies are at a point whereby, or certainly smaller businesses, are struggling with knowing what to do to be able to provide the support. Sorry, struggling to know what to do to be able to provide the support to the people. And I think as a starting point, there's more of them that are starting to move to be able to offer the support and offer the financial support that comes with that. Stepping outside of the normal remit, we don't see a massive amount of companies do that. And I think that's primarily because they're only just starting to think about what it is that they can do and to be able to offer some type of support. So if you think kind of a lot of our businesses, they're smaller businesses or growth businesses. So maybe he's kind of gone from like 50 to 100 or 150 employees. So they're very much in the transactional actions of what it is that they're doing. They do want to make sure that the people are engaged. And I think that's where we kind of, we provide support to be able to go in and work with the people and to be able to sit down and discuss things with them and to be able to have those conversations with people is great. But I also don't think that a lot of people know what it is that they're looking for or what type of support that's available. So I think kind of flipping it back around, I think, if people were to say kind of, some kind of say Reiki or something like that, I think a business would probably struggle with how, or some of the business that we deal with would struggle with how that would provide support back to the employee. And I think it's really encouraging the employee to come forward to kind of say, well, actually, what is it that you do want, and what type of, service and support that you need? Because sometimes it is very much about opening up and listening. And I've got one which is a pretty awful situation going on at the moment, and the lady's kind of come forward to say she feels bullied in the workplace, and it's about how to be able to provide that. And that was part of our conversation the other day. We can provide some counselling support, but actually, as we just touched on before, there's some kind of spiritual support, or we talked about somebody who could do Reiki, so there's other alternative things. That particular business probably wouldn't provide the extras, the extra type or the different type. They would probably go down the line of providing that day-to-day counselling element of it, because it's good and it's really strong and it does make a difference. But the other element of it, some businesses, I think, would have to really start looking at how it makes an impact upon the business and the bottom line that it would make to them about the engagement with the employee. So I think probably there's still quite a pathway to be able to make a difference, I think.
Yeah, and I think you're right. It's about, if people don't, we always do what makes sense to us. And so it would often make sense to offer counselling services. Whereas, for example, on Friday, I'm running, and if you're listening to this, you can sign up on the links below, running a free event, which is all about trauma. And it's how we can heal trauma in the easy way. So, for example, talking therapy is actually the least effective way of dealing with trauma, because it actually runs the risk of re-traumatizing people, because the unconscious mind, it doesn't know what's real, what's not real. So take somebody, for example, that had been subject to bullying. It's likely that they might be suffering from post-traumatic stress or complex PTSD. And being able to process that experience, and I don't mean Reiki. I think Reiki is a very specific type of treatment that would probably work more with healing physical conditions than changing our mindset. But in order to process trauma, where we can offer particular healing modalities that can be done in a group environment, nobody has to have their camera on, nobody actually needs to talk, and you can heal trauma in a couple of sessions. Now, for some organizations, thinking particularly about, I know that you work more with smaller organizations, but the NHS, we know that one doctor takes their own life every 3 weeks in the NHS, and one nurse takes their own life every single week. And that's just the NHS, that's not fire brigades, police service, all of that. So where we can look at offering more leading edge ways of treating and healing trauma that supports the individual, but is actually a more effective way for an organization to support people. So there's a bottom line benefit from that. Does that make sense?
No, completely. And I think that's very much where it needs to take the pathway to, for a lot of businesses. And that lady that I was just talking about, from bullying point of view, that is very much around, a husband to commit suicide and her mum's just passed away. And so the trauma of what she's had has probably ignited into where she is now. So, and the conversation we're having was the counselling support that she was receiving wasn't quite doing enough for her. She was still having kind of a blockage about a certain part of it. So it's so interestingly, yeah, exactly what it would be, understanding that there's different areas. And I think it is about educating people that there are different things that are out there and available for people to be able to use. And I think that comes down to kind of what's promoted as being the services available within the localities of where people and the businesses actually are as well. So I think it's that promotion element of an understanding, businesses understanding more of what's available and the impact that it can make on people. And I think unless potentially people have got that idea themselves that that's what they want, that's the difficulty, isn't it? Because then you're not only having to educate the business, but you're also educating the employee to ask for those things, unless they kind of have that awareness and understanding from their own point of view.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. Well, share the link with her.
Yes.
The session that I'm going to be doing is incredible, absolutely incredible. at treating and healing trauma. So do feel free to share that with her and anybody else.
Yeah.
Now, another area that I see a lot of organizations paying more heed to is mental health training for managers. And I'm again curious, what are you seeing around that particular area in organizations?
Yeah, I think there definitely has been a rise around this. I think there's the mental health first aid training side of things. From my experience of it, it's only just from a personal opinion point of view, I don't think it's been particularly. I think people who have been trained in that type of way still don't really know what to do if somebody approaches them. I think they've got an overriding awareness of, conditions, but I think if somebody actually approached them, I think then there's a real difficulty about what the next steps would be. So I think if a business has that, then they also need to be able to signpost the people who have that training of what services are going to be available and what support is going to be available within the business. Because I think sometimes the people use, the mental health first aider, then they'll go and speak to them, but they then don't know what to do with it. So they then end up carrying that burden with them, kind of knowing that they need to provide the help and support. So I'm not the biggest fan of that unless the business really provides that surrounding culture to be able to enable that to happen. I think if some of our businesses do, or a couple of businesses that we work with as being providers of mental health training, I think that again, I think that's probably got a better place, because that's being tailored towards the actual business. It's enabled them to open up more around actually what impact is it. One of the businesses that we work with like that, they kind of have the stats around actually maybe it might be about drug use in the area, or it might be about alcoholism, and so actually when that can be brought in. When that can be brought into it, then I think that makes a significant difference, because actually you can tailor that very much around, what are the trends within that local area, and what can you do to help. But again, it's about not just providing the managers the information, it's about them what have they got the ability to be able to do, what will the business be able to provide to help and support from that point of view. So I think it's a step, but I don't think it's kind of the full step. Some of our clients will kind of do like educational programs, or just working with a company at the minute who are doing that. They're going to kind of do a series of 6 or 7 programs across a couple of different sites that they've got in and around all these different areas, but they'll be run by psychologists. So again, that means that you can really deep dive into particular areas, and we can develop the programs that they want. So I think that type of thing, I think probably hooks people in a little bit more, because then they'll understand a little bit more and learn some more from there as well. So I think the mental health training for managers has got a place, but I think it's about how it's then supported within a business as well, taking it forward.
Yeah, no, and I totally agree with you, and I'm very much in agreement with your comments about mental health first aiders, because mental health first aiders, the reason that they actually were introduced in the first place was nothing actually to do with mental health. It was because there was so much bullying in the workplace going on that they wanted almost sort of internal mediators to be able to support it. And it developed into mental health first aid. But I know from my experience, I mean, I'm a psychotherapist. I've held about 10,000 one-to-one sessions with people. And, I'll be really honest, I was quite horrified that people were going through potentially 1-2 days training and then being let loose.
Everything being
And I was like, oh my God.
Overwhelming for the individual, isn't it? The person who's gone through the training, that could be
It really is. Because as you say, I mean, the topic of mental health is huge, absolutely huge. And people were walking away from this training with almost like a tomb of conditions. And from my point of view, it's not about for a mental health first aider, it's actually not about understanding the condition or even necessarily being able to spot signs. That's not their role, but it is about the core skills of really being able to hold a space for somebody, to really be able to listen, to connect, to ask the right questions. And I think what I've seen working with organizations is some of them have got it right, in that they've continued to give training to mental health first aiders, because if the mental health first aider as well is also struggling with mental health, then they've got a vested interest in wanting to support people, but they're a little bit at risk of trying to jump in and fix things, and that's not their role. So I think the mental health first aiders program, it probably had the right intention, but it really needed a lot of the core skills training. It needed a lot of interactive training about, for example, on our mental health for managers training, we do loads around solution focused coaching, around listening skills, boundaries, psychological safety, so that managers can hold that space without feeling like they have to jump in and fix the problem, solve the problem. So I totally agree with you.
And I think that's explaining about the difference between like sympathy and empathy as well, isn't it? When people are in that type of situation, kind of the listening skills is so important within there, as you say, to kind of save the space, but for them not to take that burden themselves, but need to kind of, be able to do the right things and to be able to take the relevant actions. But I think empathy is definitely the part that needs to play within making a decision to be a mental health first aider or participate in some type of training of that way as well.
And one of the things that comes through so much from our mental health training for managers, well, a big, big part of it is awareness.
Mm-hmm.
So many managers have kind of almost joked. They're like, God, I'm stressed, and I didn't even realize I was stressed. So I think some of it is also how they support themselves, how they fit their own air mask first before helping other people, like they teach you on an aeroplane.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the really big things that we see, because we work a lot in the US, is a culture of when managers are chatting to their teams, they kind of almost sort of go automatically, if you like, straight into work mode. And there isn't just that normal kind of human interaction, what we might refer to as the water cooler moment, where it's like, Louise, how are you today? How are you really doing today? It's that focus that's always on work and objectives and this, that, and the other. And what's your views or thoughts or observations around that, Louise?
I think that it's been significantly different, when we're doing the likes of Zooms and Teams and things like that. So that chit chat side of things probably gets a little bit more pushed to one side. So I don't think you do. I'm just thinking that one of my colleagues, Deborah, was away in London at the weekend. We went with problem this morning, went straight into work mode with text and said, hope we've had a nice weekend. But then the conversation started straight away of what we're going to do with this, how we're going to do it. And I'm just thinking, I never went back to it and said, did you actually enjoy taking the kids away? Because sometimes I think you do just naturally go into work mode. And I think that's because when you spend time on the phone and on the kind of the Teams calls and things, I think you feel very or much more limited on time, I think, because you're trying to speed things through, not to hold everything up. So I think there's a significant difference, and I think you notice that by doing all of the Teams and the video conferencing side of things. There's not as much of the chit chat to be able to do that, and I think it's sometimes about how you can. So a couple of weeks ago, we kind of went out as a team just to be able to sit and just have a kind of bit of a ban of talking around work side of things, but to be able to sit and just have a proper conversation, a proper catch up. And I think those type of, certainly for us as a small business, that they're really needed. Catch up moments, and we did that between holidays, so we knew that some had been away, some were going away, but it was important to kind of have a bit of a stop moment to be able to chat, just to be able to kind of reach out. And I think it's also about how you position yourself. So for all I've said that a couple of weeks ago, one of the team members had messaged and said, I really need to have a conversation with you today, and you go into that, like, are you all right? Is that, and then it's about what you do then as a business owner to ensure that actually that conversation takes place during the day, because, if they've reached out for that conversation and they obviously was a serious conversation they want to have, I therefore make time during that day to be able to enable that conversation to happen. And that becomes the priority of the day, to ensure that, from my point of view, my staff well-being at that moment in time was the priority that needed to take place. So I think you kind of can view it from different areas, can't you? You can view it from a colleague relationship side of things, that, you maybe do a little bit more chit chat, but then sometimes from a business owner point of view and the people that you've got working with it, to be able to give them the space and time to have an open conversation, I think it is really important. And I think if they know you well enough that actually if there's a problem, they're going to reach out and they're going to get the response back that they need. I think that's also a really important part of being a business owner. I think because you want, you know, from a personal point of view, I want to be at my best to be able to do it, but actually I want to make sure that any concerns that the team's got, that I can try to help them resolve sooner rather than later, so they're not carrying any type of, you know, underlying burden that's there as well. So I think there's different elements. Went off on a tangent there really a little bit, but kind of there's different elements of it there, I think, which is really important. And I think coming back to what you said, the listening part of it, and I think empathy is are two core points of being able to just be open with people.
Yeah. And what's your advice or input for managers in a world where people are working so much more from home? They're doing so much more remote working, that in terms of, now I'm going to sound really ancient when I say back in my day, when we didn't have, I mean, you had to fight to get flexible working in my day, but you did have those, you would walk from meeting to meeting or building to building. There was so much more physical interaction that took place, or even just being in the kitchen making a cup of tea and somebody had come in and you'd have that interaction. But where managers now, as you say, are so much more connected through Teams or Zoom. I mean, I remember talking to one individual who worked for a bank, and she only met her manager online. They were both in separate offices, and her manager had never even turned his camera on. She said, I have no idea what this man looks like. And I thought, oh my goodness, surely this is basic common sense that we create that, but common sense isn't necessarily common practice, as we know. So for managers that are managing teams on that more remote platform, what do you think they need to be doing more of to connect with their people on that human level?
I think it's very much about keeping the connection, you know, or starting a good connection, you know, from a starting point. If somebody's new into a business, I think it's very much about establishing those the boundaries that go with it, actually, you know, about working from home. And I think being able to ask them about what they would want, and then being able to say, well, from a business point of view, we do this, and whether that's a touch base point, you know, every week, or kind of, you know, but certainly things, as you've just said there, you know, camera needs to be on so you can get eye contact, so you can look at people, so you can have a conversation, so you can engage with them properly. I think are all really important points of it. I know certain ones about business will then, who all work remotely, will organise to do maybe once a quarter they'll get together and do kind of the, you know, a work day together, or kind of a structured meeting. So there's a little bit more, well, also there's more interaction, I think, inevitably. And my preference still is that you do things face to face, as opposed to necessarily kind of over a video conference. But the video conference has got its real good place for it. And actually, you know, we're now at the point where we can recruit anybody in the world to work for you, because you know, because you have these facilities there. But I think it's still really important that human interaction element of it. So, you know, being able to open up and to be able to have conversations with people, I think the managers really need to take responsibility for that in some way. And I think sometimes you don't always recognise, you know, you assume everybody likes remote working or hybrid working, but actually I think it's having those individual conversations with people to be able to say actually what works for you. You know, is it being in an office environment? Is it being, sometimes people just don't want to be in the home environment either. So it could be a case that actually some companies rent office space for people, or kind of, you know, shared desk space with other companies, to be able to get them out of the home because they don't want to be at home all the time. So I think it's very much about the manager opening up the conversation and to be able to kind of, you know, ask the different questions, and to kind of push the employees to ask them what they want, and, you know, kind of keep that as a continuous flow of conversation that takes place, not just well, I asked you 2 years ago and this is what you said you wanted, because I think everybody's lives change that much, and I think people's mental capacity changes that much of, you know, kind of what they're dealing with at home or external to home. You know, I think we need to keep a free flow of conversation that happens. I think that only happens through conversation, doesn't it? You know, so the regularity of putting time to one side to be able to, you know, speak to people on a one-to-one basis, I think really makes a difference.
Yeah, I know there's several organisations that have invested in our employee wellbeing platform. So we have a platform that's got EFT tapping. Have you ever heard of EFT tapping, Louise?
Certainly have, yes.
Oh my goodness, you are my kind of woman from the Northeast, and you've heard of EFT tapping.
Heard of the tapping.
It's so leading edge. So it gives people access to that, to videos about mental health, loads of amazing techniques, tools, resources. And one of the things that I loved, MediaCause, an organization in the US, were doing, and gosh, I can't remember the name, ISN software. They would often, with teams that were quite remote and spread across the world, they would use the platform and they'd pick a video, and they might do it once a month, and it might just be a sort of a 5-minute video about a particular aspect of the mind or mental health, and everybody would watch it, and then people would just have a conversation as part of their team monthly meeting. And what was really fascinating is one particular manager that comes to my mind that had gone through our mental health training. He managed huge remote teams, and he said, we've never really talked about stress or burnout or anything as a team. And I said, well, what about, if you were to get the team to watch this particular video and everyone just talk about their thoughts, what they got from it, the golden nuggets. And he got more from his team by doing that activity than he'd ever had. And there was a number of people that came forward and said, actually, I really struggle with this, I really struggle with that. So it was a beautiful way of starting the conversation. But I think it was a real eye-opener for him, because he just assumed, because he didn't hear from people, that everybody in his team was okay. And it's like, never make assumptions. We never know what's going on behind closed doors. And actually what they did is they committed to doing that. So it kept not just mental health and well-being, but understanding, as we said, understanding the mind, understanding what actually is stress. How do we respond to situations? How do we navigate the inner reality that is our mindset? And just saw such a difference in the team dynamics, a lot more psychological safety. I'm not going to say productivity, because it wasn't something that they necessarily measured to be able to say that increased productivity, but it was something that he really saw the value of doing on that monthly basis, that the organization had paid for the platform, and it was like, let's look at more creative ways that we can utilize it. Does that make sense?
Completely. And I think from a mindset point of view, I think it very much, if you can open conversations up with the right people, and I think you can frame your mindset of what it is that you want to do and what it is that you want to achieve. So I think being able to open it up in those conversations, that enables others to then come and say, well, actually, I've got some concerns with this, or this happens in a personal life. I think it's just opening conversations up, which I think helps to frame the mindset around, how it is that you behave. And the thought, one of the books that I'd read recently was around people having like faulty thinking and fruity thinking, which is kind of a nice way to be able to
Fruity thinking.
but I quite like the way he wrote the book, Shut Up and Move On. And it's quite a nice way of kind of, your faulty thinking is kind of, well, I've always done it that way, I'm always going to continue to do it that way. It's that worthless worry element of it, it's always negative thinking. So it's all very much the faulty thinking, and then changing that up to being like the fruity thinking, to think, well, actually, if I think different, I can reframe things differently. And the more you think differently, the more you act differently, and the more the outcomes are going to be different. And it's all based around kind of, actually, yes, you can worry about something, but actually put a plan in place that if A happens, B happens, C happens, then you've got a plan to be able to do it, as opposed to just kind of worthlessly thinking about what could be. So I quite like the terminology of that, because that does kind of give, to me, is like the faulty thinking is very much the negative, and the fruity thinking is very much the positive, and about how you can get to a point and certainly I've been able to learn how to do this over the last couple of years, get to the point of actually knowing that you're going down a negative pathway of how you're thinking on mindset, and actually how you can then turn that back around to become fruity thinking, that you are thinking differently, because actually they're thinking different gives you different results at the end of the day. So I think there's kind of a huge element around that. And I think opening, as you've just said, opening conversations up in the workplace where people can think a little bit different, and the given permission that it's okay to have those conversations, because I think that's the other part, that people don't know whether they can or can't have conversations like that. So I think being able to open it up and then people feel comfortable with it, I think is probably the key part of the starting point for the discussions in the workplace.
Yeah. And following on from that, what is it that you think that leaders of organizations, whether that's an organization of 50 people or 5,000 people, what do the leadership teams need to be doing more of when it comes to employee well-being in the workplace? Because, yes, there's more of a focus on employee well-being, but I still hear the term, we're a fast-paced organization, and still hear a lot around burnout, continuing rises in suicide, mental health, things like that. So from a cultural aspect or a strategic aspect, what do you think that leaders do need to be still doing more of?
I think it comes back to what we've been talking about throughout, really. I think it is that very much that listening element of kind of who needs what and when and how. And I think it's the trying to develop the culture within the business that they can understand what their ability is to be able to move things forward with it as well, kind of how they've got the opportunity of being able to shape the business, haven't they? And they've been able to really drive the business forward for it. And I think it's the opportunity to listen to what it is that people actually want within the business, the employees that are in there that can start shaping and changing, because actually it's the employees that ultimately end up, kind of delivering the services that need to be provided within there. So I think that's probably where it would come down to. I think listening to your employees, but also kind of coming up with the ideas and doing the research around actually what does make an organisation successful, around what would work. And I think there's so many different industries and sectors. I mean, we work with anyone from kind of GP surgeries to kind of manufacturing, or people who repair boats in the Indian Ocean. So I think there's so many different types of mindset that's kind of taking place there. And I think all the leaders really need to listen to their employees about what's important to them, and making them aware that it's okay to have those conversations and to be able to open them really up, I think.
And what about HR leaders? So we know, we work with a lot of organizations where HR, unless they've maybe got a wellbeing lead in place, a wellbeing manager that's got that training, has got that background. We recently developed a health and wellbeing strategy for an organization, and the HR director, which was lovely, she said, we're not experts in this field. She's an HR expert. She knows what's needed for an HR strategy, but health and wellbeing, it's sort of like a bit like we talked about earlier, that kind of like, well, I think this might work, but it can end up being a lot of throwing jelly against the wall and hoping that it sticks, rather than it being a really strategic way forward to develop health and wellbeing strategies. So what is it that you think that HR leaders would need that can help them to deliver a more strategic approach to health and wellbeing?
I think it genuinely is about reaching out and know when to ask for the support for it, because I think, as you've just said there, the people that are in a HR role, whether it's a business partner role or kind of as a director position, I think they're very much kind of, they've been in those positions, and they may well have been in the same company for 10, 15 years. And actually, if you don't step out to go and learn more, and kind of, doing your different conferences, obviously there's so many different conferences that take place. But I think unless you kind of step out to be able to learn more about it, then I think you're always just in that same mindset of it. And I think that's where actually reaching out for support to people like yourselves to be able to bring in, to be able to actually make their own awareness waking up to it, I think is like kind of a crucial part of it, because I don't think people know enough when they're just in one business from that point of view. I think they need to be exposed further to what it is. And I'm a big believer is kind of, it's absolutely fine to ask for the help and support. And we certainly see that, obviously when we're talking to other HR people, I think they think, oh, well, we need to kind of keep these people like the likes of us at arm's length, because they're just going to kind of come in. But actually, when you can add the best practice into it, and what we see within other businesses, and being able to bring that to it, I think is a massive help to businesses. But I think when kind of using companies that are specialist in in many different areas, kind of whether it's health and wellbeing, whether it's in whether it's in something like recruitment strategies, or, you know, like actually you can reach out and you can ask for the help to make sure that the work that you're doing is really kind of lead and edge within your business. And I think, you know, these things don't always have to cost a fortune, but the level of expertise that you can buy in are kind of invaluable within a business. So I think it's the reaching out, or certainly going out and exploring more themselves to be able to understand what actually is out there, and attending conferences, making sure that they're up to date, and joining kind of the community groups around kind of, you know, different things that are online or wherever it may be. But I think kind of, I suppose, in essence, surrounding yourself with the right people to enable you to be able to develop the best for the business, really.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And when it comes to organisations measuring the effectiveness of these initiatives, again, maybe if they're not linked to an overall health and wellbeing strategy or an overall HR strategy, what advice would you give to the people function about how to measure the effectiveness where they are investing? Because as we know, there's always going to be a bottom line. There's so much money to go around. And often when we have conversations with organizations, and I might say, you know, what's your budget for this? And they say, well, we actually haven't really got a budget. It's like, okay, how are you going to measure the effectiveness so that you can go back to the exec team, or you can go back to the board and say, this is specifically what it's delivered? Where do you think, or what advice would you give to HR or learning and development or any of those kind of functions about how to measure in real time the effectiveness of some of these initiatives?
I think it's understanding your starting point. I think it's kind of getting to the point of actually, this is where you are here and now, and actually how can you take that gauge, because you need to have some type of record of starting point to ensure that kind of an assessment, you know, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 months down the line, you've actually got something to be able to gauge it back against us. So I think having some type of starting point there, I think, is really important. And whether that's kind of and we do it with some of our kind of clients with different programs that we do. Kind of we do a HR mentoring program, and we kind of do a bit of a kind of questions and survey around kind of where they are at the very beginning of it, and then kind of a touch base point in the middle of it, and then at the end of it, so we can actually, so that the impact can be measured over that period of time. So we kind of, you know, put things in place where actually you've got your data to be able to make the measurements. I think if you're just trying to measure at the end and you didn't know where your starting point was, I think that becomes really difficult. And I think some people do try and do that, you know, kind of they try and look at the effectiveness, but what did it compare against? I think so that's really important to understand. And I think also being able to look at things such as really your employee retention and your engagement that you've got. I think those couple of areas really can play a key role in there. And again, you need something to kind of measure it against. But you know, we've helped certain people in businesses. From one business I've supported kind of 3 or 4 different people who were one particular guy was, you know, going to commit suicide, and the support service that we were able to provide for a business.
Can I quote you on that, Louise? Can I just quote just on a raising awareness of how we now refer to it? We don't refer to it anymore as commit suicide. Like there was a huge shift. It's
Okay.
take your own life.
Your own life. Okay. Start that bit again. So within one of the businesses, we had 4 different people, and one of the individuals was trying to take his own life at the time, and the support service that had been provided by the business kind of enabled that to not happen, you know, because he would reach out, he would do the relevant things. Other people who were kind of doing kind of, you know, harming themselves, being, again, really difficult situation. And the impact that we kind of saw over those 4 individuals, another couple of people were drug addicts. One of them had a crash in the workplace. So we were able to facilitate and to be able to support them through that. But actually the payback of that is that these people are very, very engaged. They're still in the business 3, 4 years down the line. You know, they reach out and ask for support because they've been given the safe space to be able to do that. So sometimes it's not always just kind of in the numbers. It's been a case that actually we've got the loyalty back from it, which actually you then buy into, that you keep your talent, you keep the people that are within your business there because they've got the knowledge within the business there. So even just on that example there, you know, we can tell that there's a difference being made. But I think you do need to have some form of kind of, where's your starting point and where's your point of review as you work through.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess one of my final questions, which has now just completely gone out of my head. Oh gosh, it really has. You keep talking and it'll come back to me.
All right, I've had to write a couple of things down here because I said things I was thinking I forgot what was said.
Oh, it's gone sailing through my mindset. Um,
So,
but the reason I asked that question as well is I was really surprised. Oh, it's come back to me now. I know what it is. But I was really surprised that there are some organizations that don't even measure absence, which I guess maybe that's my own experience of working in HR, that we absolutely measured absence, we reported on absence, we sat in front of a strategy board, an exec board every month, which often to me felt like the X factor. And we'd have to report on what were we actively doing to reduce absence and reduce employee relations issues, all of that kind of thing, which is why when I had my huge light bulb moment that this was a piece of the jigsaw puzzle that was missing, that giving people the knowledge and insight about the mind and mindset and physical health and well-being, if people had access to that, we could take a very different approach to absence. So it still surprises me that there are organizations that don't measure absence. So when I talk to them about mental health training for managers and say, what are the kind of themes that you've got, they're actually not really in a position to know that, because some of them have got cultures where they can just take time and they don't need to give a reason for that time, which I do support that. But it's, unless you've got very good HR business partners that are on the ground, it's almost like, well, where do we start if we don't know what the problem is that we're trying to resolve? Does that make sense?
it absolutely does. So there's quite a lot of small businesses don't necessarily record their absence from a longer term absence point of view and a shorter term absence. And one ongoing one that I've got at the moment is, someone who's been off for, they got in touch with, the business got in touch with me, individual had been off for 7 months, decided they want to come back to work. They weren't really fit enough to be able to come back to work. So kind of working with them to be able to kind of work through the process, and kind of here we are 6 months later and they're still not well enough to be able to come back to work. But actually that business would have got themselves into a bit of a pickle by not really knowing how to do that. So there's a lot of work around kind of the longer term absences, and again the help and support that can give to people, and those open conversations. There's lots of statistics around people who've been off for over 12 months, the likelihood of being able to get them back into work after that 12-month period, if there's been very limited contact from the workplace, is very, very low. But actually to be able to reach out, and we always say kind of every 4 or 5 weeks, meeting with people, from when their absence starts, to be able to have open conversations, and actually then the business can decide what help and support that they can have and give them, and kind of help facilitate a successful return back to work when the employee is ready to be able to do that. Or if it's a point where they need to exit them out of the business, but at least the track's been there to be able to follow through. So I think definitely from the longer term absence, and I think shorter term absence again is so important to be able to kind of have in place, so that again you're opening the conversations, you're talking about underlying health conditions, and yes, you have to give some type of warnings out sometimes if people kind of over abuse that and there's no kind of underlying conditions there. But you're right, there's so many people that don't, or so many businesses still don't really record their absences, and you need or allow people to put holidays in to cover absence as well. You kind of sometimes hide in the concerns there that actually if there are people who've got genuine well-being issues or kind of longer term health conditions, that actually the business doesn't always get to see what they are because they're not asking the right questions around it. So for me, it's one of the things that we are quite passionate around, because I think that can, and businesses have seen an impact upon that once you do put some structure in place, and to be able to help that, I think there is a relief once they see that actually if you did A, B and C in the right order, that it helps the employees facilitate them returning to work or being in work as well. So I think there's some real benefits out of it.
And it's one of the reasons that we're so passionate about mental health training for managers, because it's part of that supporting people to get back to work. I mean, I still work as a private coach and therapist, and I remember one lady that I worked with, she was a director actually in one of the banks, and she'd been out of the business for about 4 months, which in her position had a tremendous impact within the organisation. And she'd come to a session and she'd had a conversation with her direct manager, who said, are you feeling, as a sort of, well-being chat, let's check in and see how you're doing. He'd asked her, are you feeling worse, better, or about the same? I just thought, please give me the telephone number for your HR director so that we can get mental health training and how to have these conversations. Because she said, I just cringed. And so thanks
for them being in that situation, sorry to interrupt there, but it's difficult for them being in it because actually they then don't know, it's difficult to then respond when someone's asked you in that type of way. So it helps facilitate the conversation if they know how to do it right and putting just the right terminology around certain aspects and being able to be supportive towards people who are off. I mean, as that lady, 4 months at that higher level within a business, it'd be difficult for her and for the business, wouldn't it?
Well, thankfully, she came to me and we got back into work. But
those are circumstances where people actually may well have reached out to you and they pay for it themselves, rather than through a business to be able to facilitate it because they know that they need it. Kind of back to what we were talking about earlier, sometimes people need to know what they need prior to being able to ask for it. I think that is one of the biggest points. I think when people aren't exposed to the different services that are available, I think once they're exposed, it makes an impact.
No, absolutely. And I remember delivering training for one organisation, again, mental health training for managers, and I mentioned hypnotherapy, and the marketing director actually got in touch with me and she said, I really, really struggle with a fear of public speaking. And she said, I can't avoid it anymore. I've spent most of my career really passionate about what she does, but she'd been promoted. She now reported into the CEO. And yet, I mean, the fear of public speaking is rife, absolutely rife. And it's one of the areas I've always specialised in. And it wasn't until she was made aware that there's a different approach, because she tried CBT, she tried counselling, got nowhere with it. And then within literally a handful of sessions, she just transformed. Her confidence was through the roof. She was pitching, she was presenting, all the things that were required at her level. So I absolutely agree with you. And
mindset side of things as well, isn't it? So I know my son's had hypnotherapy for flying, so we've flown all over the world, and all of a sudden he's became scared of flying. So he's had hypnosis to be able to enable him to get back on a plane to be able to do it. So I think once you realise that's available and you find someone that you can trust to do that, then it opens opportunities back up there as well.
Absolutely. It's one of the reasons that we love doing, and we get such good feedback with our employee wellbeing webinars, because we bring things that people would never have necessarily heard of, like EFT, and we'll run laser sessions where we'll actually do a live demo, which people absolutely love, because within 10 minutes, if you've experienced EFT, you know this, it's like, I feel completely different. It's like this almost seems too good to be true. And it's like, no, it's very rooted in science.
Yeah.
So when we can do things like that, and it just opens a whole gateway up to people, a whole doorway of possibility of things that they can do to support themselves, which actually leads into my next question. If you have got somebody, and this is maybe more of a UK-based question, but if you have got somebody who is on long-term sick, that's struggling with their mental health, but they're not really taking the kind of accountability, then maybe not doing everything that they can to support themselves. Maybe they have engaged in the EAP services, maybe they have had some of the, say, counselling that was available, but that they're still not back at work. What's the current stance in terms of what organisations can do? Because as we know, we've got the Equality Act in the UK, we can't discriminate, but where you have got somebody that isn't taking accountability for their health and well-being, where does the land lie with organisations?
I think you obviously every company needs to be very careful about the steps that they take and make sure that they get some advice around the rights and wrongs of how to do it. But I think, as I mentioned there before, when somebody goes onto longer term sick, and that for me is anything kind of 4 to 5 weeks is when kind of the flag for us to start kind of managing situations. And I think when you've got the regularity of conversations taking place again every 4, 5, 6 weeks with somebody, that provides a structure of what it is that you know about somebody, so you know whether they're accountable, whether they are reaching out, whether they've done some of the things that we talk about talking therapies, obviously through the NHS services, or whether they're reaching out to do something kind of privately, or whether they're doing something through the workplace, and keep providing those opportunities to them. And I think making them accountable during the course of those meetings of kind of, have you followed this up? Have you done this? Is there a reason that you haven't been in touch with, I don't know, Bupa, or have you haven't reached out to them, that this is available to them? And I think as a business, you can only do so much, you can only offer so much, you can only make available as much as what it is. And it's got to be down to the individual to want to make a difference. And coming back to when we've touched on mindset, it's got to be their mindset that encourages them to be able to want to do that. And I think always making sure that they've got the right people around them kind of at home, if they can, that they're supported in any which way they can. So I think, but there is a point where you exhaust all those opportunities from a business point of view. And I think you can provide occupational health assessments to be done, and that can be done, quite early doors when someone's gone off, and then kind of, later down the track, where if you're actually at a point of thinking the individual's unlikely to come back to work, we've done as much as what we can, we've offered as much as what we can to be able to do it. And then it may be a case that there's another occupational health assessment that takes place, or a GP report maybe. And then sometimes it's about making a decision that actually you may well need to exit them out of the business, because you've actually done as much as what you can, and you've followed all the steps through, and you've offered all the support that can be done. But ultimately, from a business point of view, there is somebody needed to be able to do that role, and that's why they're employed to do it in the first place. So I think, yes, you're absolutely right around the Equality Act. You have to be very careful about it, and I think that's where making sure that you've done all the right things at the right time is really, really important. But I think, a business can only wait so long to enable that person to be able to come back, and that can vary. Smaller businesses, some businesses might be 6, 7 months, and they're desperate by which point to be able to get someone to return to work. Some bigger businesses might be kind of 12, 18 months before they do that. But it's all very relevant based upon the individual circumstances and situations that's there. But the main point of that is kind of offering the support, and being able to exhaust all of your options, and seeing where the individual makes their own decisions from there, really.
Yeah, it kind of highlights the need for prevention over cure as well, doesn't it?
It does. And I think that's where we kind of started with, and sometimes when you see people in the workplace that are starting to, have some problems, are you aware that there's something external that's going on? And we've had situations before where I was called into a business where this guy had kind of obviously kind of lost his temper with one of the other employees. I was called in to speak to both of the individuals, and nobody knew what was going on with the guy. And actually his wife had a mental breakdown, one of his children being diagnosed with autism, the other one was getting diagnosed for ADHD. So the gentleman just had so much turmoil that was going on, and actually didn't know how to vent what was taking place, and he did it completely incorrectly, and he knew that he had. However, that's difficult in a workplace, isn't it? Because actually there needs to be it needs to be managed from a workplace point of view, and that's where people need to be open and honest to be able to speak to their line managers, to be able to, make people aware of what their own personal circumstances are sometimes, just to give them the understanding more than anything else. So I think there's a big part to play around the talking and the listening in all of this.
That also reminds me of what we said earlier, is where managers can have those more chit-chat conversations, those water cooler, like, how are you doing? How are you really doing? You don't have to ask it every day, but I'm really curious that if that manager of the individual had more awareness of what was going on in that person's life, and actually that individual felt psychologically safe to share some of that, how that incident could have been prevented. and how the manager could have dealt with it in more compassionate terms.
And I was doing some emotional intelligence assessment training the other day. So they'd done the assessments, and I was doing the coaching part afterwards. And one individual had said, oh, I got an email from two of the senior leaders who both said, is everything all right? You're not your normal self, is everything okay? And he was absolutely honoured that they'd taken the time to be able to do that. And I said, do you not have that conversation when you're in the kitchen? Is that? And he went, oh yeah, I have it all the time. I just didn't realise I was having it until you've just mentioned it. So he hadn't realised that people were asking about his well-being. They knew that, they'd picked up the same as when you're working with people day in, day out, when there's something not quite right with somebody, and they'd been picking that up softly and gently with him. And he hadn't really kind of put it, but then once it was actually in writing, and his comment was, nobody had ever asked me that before. And, I thought, how special is that? And it's literally just being just want to make sure everything's all right with you, you don't seem to be quite yourself at the minute. Please do let us know. And he was so pleased and honoured and opened up quite easily to his manager then, to his two managers, about what the circumstances were. But interesting, isn't it, that the questions over the water cooler in the kitchen had been had, but actually it was physically in writing, that it made him realise that actually he's obviously behaving in a slightly different way, that people around him have been close enough to understand when there was something a little bit out of the norm for him. So it's the questions are important to have, I think, or ask.
Absolutely. So my final question, because we could be here for 2 hours, two northern lasses chit-chatting away. And this there probably isn't a sort of one-size-fits-all answer to this, but I'm curious about your thoughts about where well-being actually should sit in an organisation. And the reason that I ask this is I find with some organisations that you have some individuals that are taking responsibility for well-being initiatives that actually don't sit in the people function. So, for example, we were approached by a huge pharmaceutical company who undoubtedly would have had a massive people function. And it was the corporate sustainability manager that was organising mental health training for managers. And I said to her, I said, why, why are you arranging this and not either, your HR manager or learning and development manager? And she said, oh, I've just kind of been given responsibility for well-being. And I was really, really surprised about that. But I'm finding that from my observations that it's almost like well-being hasn't really been given a home. It kind of gets a bit sort of passed around a little bit. So obviously within certain organisations, depending on the size, that might be a factor. But yeah, where do you think that well-being should belong and live?
Well, I think it could, well, to me, it's across the whole of the leadership, really, isn't it? It's the overarching of the leadership. But I think a couple of different thoughts I just had there while you were talking. I think it's firmly sits with the leadership, and I think the accountability and conversations seem to be happening from the boardroom all the way down. That should be part of the conversations that they're having when they're opening things up, or when they're opening conversations up around kind of the well-being and looking after their people. I think for me, it does sit within the people side of things, because actually the people have all the other strategies, or should be having all the other people strategies that are focused on. So I think they all fit together like a jigsaw. So I think there's certain parts of it, but I don't think they need to kind of take full responsibility for all the actions. I think, within a business, I think if you do kind of committees, whether it's like a culture committee or whether it's a wellbeing committee or something, where you've got different people from different parts of the business that are coming together, and I suppose in essence maybe is doing kind of like an action group, to be able to make a change, or to be able to kind of come forwards with suggestions, or whether they're allocated a certain amount of money. But having someone from people within there who kind of is I suppose in essence the overall CSO type person, or they're the ones that can feed back into the leadership around it. But I think having people from different areas in the business, which they'll all have completely different experiences depending upon the size of the business, I think it's really good to open conversations. And I think as long as you haven't got people, I think as long as it's proactive, I think as long as there's some kind of reference about what is trying to be achieved, like what's your terms of reference, what are you trying to achieve within the group, and actually what's the scope, what decision making can you actually have. and people that want to be on there that actually want to make a difference, you know, to be able to look after the business. So I think there's a few different threads of that fall into it, but I think for me the overall is the leaders, then the people need to take the responsibility for it, but I think then it can be kind of put out to different committees across businesses to be able to make it fit together. And you know, you see them being able to organise, you know, different days and activities and, you know, wellbeing sessions, or, you know, there's so many different things that can open up from a business. And I think if you've got a wider scope of people that have all got responsibility for it, then you're taking in so many different ideas, as we've said throughout this. Sometimes people don't know what's available, and actually by having a wider group of people, then that conversation can be a lot more open and honest, and, you know, can make other people think about situations. So yeah, I think there's to me, it fits under other strands. It's not just kind of one person does everything, isn't it? And as you say, that the place that you were talking about is a bit of a different place. I wouldn't have probably put it under the kind of the corporate structure element of it there.
No, that was just a bit of curveball. It was
Yeah.
interesting. Have you got any final thoughts or anything that you'd like to share, Louise, before we bring this fabulous conversation to a close?
I think for me, I think all of this really roots back to kind of from a mindset side of things. I think if leaders within a business are really making a difference and looking after their mindset and I've touched on emotional intelligence a couple of times, but if they've got the kind of a good emotional intelligence, I think then that starts to pick up on, they understand their business more, you know, so the mindset and the emotional intelligence of the leaders, I think that can really kind of play out through a business, because actually then I think kind of well-being element of it comes in, because people are open, they're free, their conversations, the empathy element of it all fits together as well. So I think they're a real, or those two areas for me are a real positive that needs to be, or they need to be positive within the mindset of take place from a leader's point of view. So I think it's the better the leaders can be in a business in those type of areas. I think in essence it's better that the business starts to perform. You know, it's the employment engagement that comes with it, the retention that takes place, but also I think there's general business performance as well. I think people do see an awful lot of difference when people or the leaders are in the right place as well, because I think they can understand how the systems manage properly.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. Well, if you want to stay on the line, Louise, and I just want to say thank you to anybody that has downloaded this. I will include a link to the free event that we're running this Friday. So if you are a business leader, an HR leader, a wellbeing manager that's looking for a more transformative approach to trauma, then please come and join us 11:30 a.m. UK time. And equally, if you are struggling with trauma, if you are dealing with something that just isn't shifting, then come and have that experience. There is no charge. There is no need to have your camera on or talk about it. So I will look forward to seeing you there. And any comments, please do drop them in the comments box. But otherwise, thank you. And I look forward to joining you again on another episode of the Mind Solution podcast. Bye-bye for now.